And now we begin to turn away from so much of the portraits, start getting into some of the areas that photographies begin to get into uh, soon after its invention. And then also, noting going back to uh, Fox Talbot and the invention of the negative, which that became a huge game changer for some photographers. Slowly over a period of time, uh, with the negative, and again, better chemistry, better innovation, all of that. The negative started to become, uh, it started to reign supreme, you could say, over the daguerreotype. Again, the daguerreotype, you can only have the one photo. With a negative, you're able to make multiple copies of the photo. So some of the other ideas going on at the time. So here we have the traveling tableau vivant. Essentially, it's sort of like a living photograph where you would have people uh, stage this sort of uh, this image that could be, photograph for longevity. Um, it's much like, people trying to think of, a good comparison where they had the mannequin challenge and stuff like that. You have these people on this little platform, they're pretending to be this sort of living picture. And basically, sort of the ideas coming from photography and, and ideas around this time. And another first, a stereo photograph, stereograph. Uh, so essentially, today, so, 19th century television, these photographs that you put in this little viewer, when you look at it, it has the appearance of 3D. So you could almost say it's like, virtual reality during the 19th century. Because the way our eyes are positioned, that distance between our eyes when we look at things, if you're to close one eye, look at something, close your open eye, look at it with the other eye, there's this sort of shift. So some photographers figured out how to create that subtle shift, put them together. You look at these two different photos, and it would appear to have this sort of 3D effect. So it's sort of mimicking this natural way that we view things. Also, we have, one of the first photo collage. So taking different photos, putting them together to create a whole new image. So it's sort of, the idea of taking these images, putting it together to create a new one. And as I was saying, that's where the whole idea of the negative becomes a game changer. So Oscar Gustav Rylander, uh, he becomes sort of this champion, of the negative, of using the negative, sort of things to come. So, how does this photograph feel? So, as I mentioned some of the stuff before, we have, photographers and painters working together. The uh, one critic making the statement that, painting is now dead. Photography will take over painting. So Rylander is one of the first sort of artists to, take up photography as the medium, photography as the chosen tool. So that his photographs are essentially, they're mimicking painting. If you take a bunch of paintings about the same time that Rylander did his, there would be very similar feel to it. The composition, the appearance of the person. So very similar to painting. So much like the two ways of life, composed from 32 different negatives. So like all the people, the backgrounds, all the different stuff you see is from these separate negatives. And so what we have here is sort of this person torn between a good moral life, good moral standing, and the other side is, the party life, going crazy, indulging in sin. Uh, Another way to kind of describe uh, the images in Rylander's, two ways of life. Do you want to go the good moral path, or do you want the party life? It's kind of like there's one or the other. There's no in between the way he's portraying this. But nonetheless, like I was saying, the with the negative as it comes into being, now we have photographers cutting up negatives, cutting and pasting, creating these images that are composed, and they mimic the feel and the idea and the narrative of painting. Uh, But so his, young girl, fastening a dress, um, where in a way it's almost like children back then were meant to sort of be adults, basically. So we have this way of, she's dressing herself. And again, more of a documentation type of ideas going on. So Lewis Carroll and Rylander, using the ideas of coming from Darwin, especially the one in the middle there is laughing and crying. What's the difference between laughing and crying? What's the from a visual standpoint, how much difference is there? So they're basically, capturing the emotional, facial, uh, the way our faces look, making these different emotions. Are we happy? Are we sad? You're laughing, crying, smiling. Is it a happy smile? Is it kind of a nervous smile? We have all these sort of different facial expressions that we make, and now we have, the photography, uh, a much easier way to capture that. And so Lewis Carroll, Alice Lindell is a beggar girl. So, children, so children were supposed to be like little adults in a way. Um, other ideas, children should be seen and not heard. So the role of children is kind of interesting. You're supposed to hurry up, grow up, be like an adult. Act your age, be older than you are. Uh, that sort of look at children. In the nude studies, that it's this idea that they're little adults. It's getting away from the idea of the innocence and all of that of being a child. And so going along the same line of composing your photograph to mimic a painting. So Henry Robinson's Fading Away, composed of seven different negatives. So the people were photographed at different times. The interior of the room, the clouds in the background. Really even with the technology of the time and all of that, it would still be hard to get sort of, the perfect lighting for everything so that everything turns out perfect. So Robinson basically, using all these different photos to compose the final photo. As I mentioned before, cutting and pasting these negatives, all different manners to create these different images. Um, but again, it has this feel of a painting. And so another one of Robinson's figures in a landscape. Uh, so again, how do you create the perfect image? Could you get the nice, good, perfect lighting on the figures and the sky at the same time? Or are they taken at uh, two different times? But again, Robinson again manipulating photos uh, in different ways to get his final image. Opposite him is Peter Henry Emerson. So for him, photographers should work with what they have. They should not have to create this perfect image. The world isn't perfect. Uh, you should work with what you have. So his sort of argument against Robinson is, he does his photos with what is available. You're not always going to have the perfect light. You can manipulate more with the camera than you can always rely and deal with negatives. So now he has the sort of opposite take that photographs should be true. Photographs should be honest. He's not manipulating the photograph and using several different negatives like Rylander and Robinson would do. So again, just sort of the feel is totally different from his photographs that he's getting. Uh, there might not be necessarily as clear and crisp as uh, the Robinson, but that for Emerson, it's like that's where Robinson is cheating. What's the rules of photography? Robinson's cheating. You shouldn't do that. You should, work with what you have. That's what a real photographer will do. They will accept their limitations and they'll still work with it to get the perfect image that they want. So that's, like I said, that's basically the big argument between the two. So the more pictorial effect, creating that perfect image, having to use multiple negatives, are the naturalistic photography. Working with what you have. You're not always going to have the best conditions, so if you're a really good photographer, you're going to find a way to get the perfect image. You're not going to have to rely on all these different uh, tricks that you can do in the darkroom. Your tricks will be within the camera itself. So that is it for the first part of the lecture. Next, we'll start to look at the American take on the ideas of photography and how photography can be used as an art form.